Welcome, everyone. My name is Dr. Laura Cohen. I'm the Executive Director here at the Harriet and Kenneth Kupferberg Holocaust Center at Queensborough Community College at the City University of New York in Bayside, Queens. Our mission is to use the lessons of the Holocaust to educate people about the ramifications of prejudice, racism, and stereotyping. Today's special event is entitled Finding Refuge at Bryn Mawr, the exiled mathematician Emmy Noether, featuring Qinna Shen, Associate Professor of German at Bryn Mawr College. The Kupferberg Holocaust Center in Bayside, New York is situated on the traditional land of the Mantinecock people who continue to live here today. We offer gratitude and respect to all of the indigenous people of Turtle Island, past, present, and future, including the Lenape and Shinnecock peoples. What I just read is what we call a land acknowledgement, and this is a statement recognizing that the land we all occupy in the course of our daily lives, including our schools, jobs, parks, and homes, as well as the names of towns and roads, was first inhabited by another group of people who were forcibly expelled and murdered. Today, we identify those crimes for what they are: mass atrocities and genocide. These horrors continue to have devastating political, social, psychological, economic, and environmental impacts upon and within Native American and Indigenous communities. And for those of you here in person, I encourage you to stay after the event to check out our latest exhibition entitled Genocide and Mass Atrocities, Connecting History, Violence, and Accountability, featuring 13 episodes of genocides across time and across continents. Today's event is a part of the 2025-2026 KHC and National Endowment for the Humanities Colloquium entitled Resistance, Resilience, and Reinvention, Artists and Academics Fleeing Nazism. It's co-sponsored by QCC's Department of Mathematics and Computer Science, as well as 6 other organizations around the United States. And those include the Center for the Study of Genocide and Human Rights at Rutgers University, the Reef Center for Human Rights and Conflict Resolution at Christopher Newport University, the Holocaust and Human Rights Education Center in White Plains, the Ray Walpole Institute for the Study of the Holocaust, Genocide, and Crimes Against Humanity at Western Washington University, the Holocaust, Genocide, and Interfaith Education Center at Manhattan University, and the Institute for Genocide and Mass Atrocity Prevention at Binghamton University. I'd like to thank our colleagues from the Media Services team and Digital Transformation departments, including Phil Roncaroni and Jesse Pina, as well as Barana Soman, the KHC's Museum Coordinator, for their help in producing today's event. So before we begin, for those of you attending in person, please make sure to turn your cell phones off. And after the presentation, we'll host a brief Q&A. For those of you watching online, please be sure to drop your questions in the Q&A button at the bottom of your screen. And for those of you here, we'll pass around a mic. So now it's my pleasure to introduce one of this year's KHC NEH Faculty Fellows, Dr. Mark Zeltzer. Dr. Zeltzer is Assistant Professor of Philosophy in the Social Sciences Department here at Queensborough, and his research is on the philosophy of mathematics, ancient political philosophy, Jewish philosophy, and military ethics. Dr. Zeltzer?
Hey, good afternoon. I'm Mark Zeltzer. I teach philosophy here at Queensborough, and I'd like to welcome all of you attending today and thank those of you who are watching this online. I also want to thank especially Dr. Cohen for giving us the opportunity to bring our speaker here today. I'd like to thank Barana Soman here for her support, and I'd also like to thank Allison Semino and Beth Ann Cunahan, my fellow fellows, this year at the Kupferberg Holocaust Center for helping making all this possible. It's my pleasure to introduce today's speaker, and I want to take a moment to do justice to her range of achievements. Qinna Shen holds a PhD in German from Yale University and is Associate Professor and Chair of the German Department at Bryn Mawr College, one of the most storied institutions in American higher education. She's the author of 2 books, The Politics of Magic, Defa Fairy Tale Films, and her most recent, Jinny Lan and the Art of Subversion, Chinese-German Culture and Politics Through a Feminist Lens, published in 2025. She's also co-edited additional volumes on German encounters with East Asian cultures and on Asian-German film history. Her articles have appeared in journals spanning German studies, cinema, media studies, and, as we'll see in a moment, mathematics. She sits on the editorial boards of German Studies Review and 2 other scholarly series. She's chaired multiple committees for German Studies Association, and she's just been elected to the GSA's executive board itself, one of the premier professional organizations in her field. She's also currently co-editing a special issue marking the GSA's 50th anniversary. At Bryn Mawr, her teaching ranges Just as widely as her research, she's developed courses on Weimar cinema, on censorship in Germany and China, on humor and satire from the Enlightenment to the present, and on the ethics of innovation, courses that resist easy categorization and that reflect genuinely restless intellectual curiosity. But it's her sustained engagement with the Jewish experience under Nazism that I want to highlight most directly, because it speaks to why this venue and this audience is exactly the right home for her talk today. Professor Shen has spent years tracing the paths of Jews who fled Nazi persecution, not only those who came to the United States, but those who found unlikely refuge in Shanghai, one of the few places in the world that required no visa for entry. She's published a review essay on the Viennese Jewish exile community in Shanghai, moderated and organized multiple scholarly panels on the Jewish refugee experience in East Asia, and brought eyewitness voices into the classroom, including by organizing public lectures with Sonja Mühlberger, who was herself born in Shanghai to Jewish parents who had fled Europe. She's also contributed to the broader literature on Jewish life under and after Nazism through her work as a translator, rendering into English essays on anti-Semitism and Jewish identity in post-war Germany in a volume, Why I Am Leaving, A Jew in the New Germany. This is not a scholar who's touched the Holocaust from a distance. It's a subject she's returned to in multiple forms and from multiple angles throughout her career. It's that sustained commitment that gives special weight to the article that brings us here today, A Refugee Scholar from Nazi Germany. Emmy Noether and Bryn Mawr College did something rare for a humanities publication. It escaped the humanities entirely. It circulated among physicists and mathematicians worldwide and helped restore the memory of a woman who Einstein himself called a genius, a woman who had been expelled from her university by Nazis and found refuge at the very college where Professor Shen now teaches and serves as department chair. Please welcome Professor Qinna Shen.
Thank you, Dr. Cohen, for inviting me, and Dr. Mark Zeltzer for your generous introduction. It's an honor to be at Kupferberg Holocaust Center to speak about Emmy Noether. First, I will share with you how I came to this topic. I joined Bryn Mawr College in 2016. At the time, the college had its annual Community Day of Learning. The topic for 2017 and 2018 was Being Bryn Mawr, Past, Present, and Future. So I wanted to do something. The philosophy department's website, I learned, said that Hannah Arendt was among the prominent guests at Bryn Mawr in the 1970s. And in 1971, the college even bestowed the highest honor, the M. Carey Thomas Award, on her. So I was wondering, so I knew that Hannah Arendt came to Bryn Mawr as a refugee scholar from Nazi Germany. So I was wondering who came to Bryn Mawr. So Hannah Arendt came to America, right, in 1941 as a refugee scholar from Nazi Germany. So I was wondering who came to Bryn Mawr, maybe even in the 1930s. So I did some research, and I went to the special collections at Bryn Mawr College. And the then director, Eric Pomeroy, told me that Emmy Noether was among its most prominent guests. That's how I started my research, and I wrote the article. The panel where I presented on was well attended. Among its guests was a historian of mathematics, Bill Dunham, and he told me that the ashes of Emmy Noether was actually interred in the cloisters of Bryn Mawr College. And he took me there. We saw the cement or the gravestone where it's marked EN. And few people would know that EN stands for Emmy Noether. And I will show you a photo very soon. So, so I wrote the article, and it pieced together archival information and information from published articles and books, and to piece together the story of how and why a world-class mathematician like Emmy Noether, right, came to a small liberal arts college. After my article was published, to my pleasant surprise, I got a lot of positive reactions from not only mathematicians, but also physicists, not only from the US, but also from around the world. And also inquiries came from a filmmaker, a scriptwriter, high school teachers, and students. And I realized Emmy Noether is huge. So here I will start showing my slides. So here is a list of scholars who came to Bryn Mawr, and I listed them. Emmy Noether was the star academic who came to Bryn Mawr. So Emmy Noether was born into a Jewish family in Erlangen. Her father, Max Noether, was a professor of mathematics at the University of Erlangen. She was the oldest of 4 children. Sitting in the middle was Fritz Noether, who later became a professor of applied mathematics. And I visited the birth house of Emmy Noether. Here, a plaque was finally put up. You can read that she was born in 1882, 3 years before Bryn Mawr College was established. And she died in April 1935 in Bryn Mawr. And this is me. So I truly visited the place. And she went to a girls' school and learned German and arithmetic. She was certified to teach English and French. English will come in handy later on, but her ambition was way more bigger than that. She wanted to study mathematics at the university. However, women were not allowed to enroll in universities. Since her father was a professor there, so she could audit courses. She was one of the 2 female students versus over so close to 1,000 male students there. In the winter of 03-04, she decided to enroll at University of Göttingen, which already allowed female students to officially enroll. But she was way too ambitious. She took way too difficult classes, way too many, so she got very sick and she returned home. The 04, students were also allowed to officially enroll at University of Erlangen. So she became the only woman in the mathematics department among 46 male students. She studied under Paul Gordon, and her dissertation was awarded summa cum laude. Later on, she distanced herself from that dissertation, which was very concrete and computational, and she called it crap. So the German word missed, because later on she moved into abstract math. Her father had a polio, so when his health failed, she stepped in and taught his classes, and also did a grading and everything from 1908 to 1915. Paul Gordon had a successor after his retirement. Ernst Fischer introduced Emmy Noether to abstract math. So when Paul Gordon died, her father took Noether to Göttingen to work on the obituary. And during that visit, she really impressed the 2 big shot mathematicians at the time, Felix Klein and David Hilbert. So in 1915, the Klein and Hilbert invited Emmy Noether to Göttingen to be their research assistant. And you notice also the war had started, right? So young male mathematicians were in shortage. So that gave Noether also a chance. The same year, Einstein invited Noether from Berlin to Göttingen. Einstein was working on his theory of general relativity, but he had some nagging mathematical problems. So he was hoping that the mathematicians in Erlangen could help him. So he came and he held 6 two-hour lectures on the theory of gravity. He told David Hilbert that, I quote, "You know that Fräulein Noether is continually advising me in my projects on general relativity, and that it is really through her that I have become competent in the subject." So now 2 years ago now, in 2024, this book by Lee Phillips, Einstein's tutor, The Story of Emmy Noether and the Invention of Modern Physics, was published, right? So the title, Einstein's Noether, was really to be understood literally. Noether tutored Einstein mathematics, not only directly, but also indirectly through Felix Klein, who stood much closer to Einstein in person. So you can see Klein also wrote to Hilbert, I quote, "It is only because of Miss Noether that I was able to delve into the present materials." Noether's theorem was published later in 1918, but an earlier version of Noether's theorem was shared with Klein, Hilbert, and Einstein before November 1915. However, all her contribution was not credited. Einstein has become, as you know, the scientist, but Emmy Noether was forgotten for most part of the 20th century. Nobel Prize winner Frank Wilczek said, Noether's theorem of symmetry and invariance is the single most profound result in all of physics. Physicist Brian Greene also wrote, "Emmy Noether's theorem is so vital to physics that she deserves to be as well known as Einstein, yet many have never even heard of her." Right? So, so hopefully more justice will be done to her. 1915, Noether was allowed to lecture, but only as the assistant to David Hilbert in name. In actuality, she actually did it all. She was the only professor in the classroom. She is a very casual person. She speaks loudly, she laughs loudly, and she likes to walk. Everybody says she enjoys walking while talking mathematics. And her colleagues really respected her and called her der Noether. People who speak German know der is the article for masculine nouns, right? So der Noether, in a way, problematically thinks mathematics, like people with Noether's skills and capabilities, are male, right? Inherently. So mathematics is male inherently. She is also known as the mother of modern algebra. She has built a large community, a large following. People from far and near came to study under Noether, and they become known as the Noether Knaben. Knaben means boys. They include, I highlighted a few names here. So Max Döring here on this guy was Noether's favorite student. And she also had students from Japan, Shoda, from China, Zheng Zhongzhi, and Weber. So Weber later became an ardent Nazi. And Ernst Witt, van der Werden from Holland, Richard Brouwer, Emmy Arting from the former Austrian-Hungarian Empire, Helmut Hasse, and also Alexandrov from the Soviet Union. One of them is Olga Taussky, right? She's a woman, but she's also known as Der Knabe, a boy. And she is from the former Austrian-Hungarian Empire, and she will reappear in my story later. Yeah, so you can see she is a mathematician of high caliber. In 1917, the mathematician faculty members applied to the Ministry of Education to make an exception. And their argument was, if we don't do something, she might be hired away by the University of Frankfurt. And then the reply came, and that says, basically, do not worry. No German universities could hire any woman, right? So there would be no competition. So again, the mathematics and the science department faculty members supported the habilitation lecture for Noether to become a Privatdozent. Becoming a Privatdozent, she could lecture officially. But the conservative faculty members in philology and history asked David Hilbert at a faculty meeting, how can we permit a woman to become a Privatdozent? Having become a Privatdozent, she can then become a professor and a member of the university senate. Is it possible that a woman enter the senate? What will our soldiers think when they return to the university and find that they are expected to learn at the feet of a woman? And David Hilbert very famously retorted, meine Herren, right? So my gentlemen, I do not see that the sex of the candidate is an argument against her admission as a Privatdozent. After all, the university senate is not a bathhouse. Now, a bathhouse is segregated by sexes, and a university senate should not be, right? So you can see how faculty meetings could become very tense, and that's a case also today. In 1918, Noether, as I mentioned, published her paper Invariant Variational Problems. And so Einstein, among others, read the paper and supported her candidacy for habilitation. He wrote to Hilbert, it would have done no harm to the troops returning to Göttingen from the field if they had been sent to school under Fräulein Noether. She appears to know her métier very well. So 1919, as you know, the war ended and Germany became a republic. That's the Weimar Republic, the first democracy. And the Weimar Constitution allowed or guaranteed equal rights for women. So Noether was allowed to habilitate on this paper, and she could teach at the university. That was 4 years after she first applied to become a Privatdozent. In 1921, she published another significant paper, Ideal Theory in Ring Domains, and then some year later, she could finally receive a modest compensation for her teaching. How many of you have watched the Oppenheimer film? Yeah, right, quite a few of you. Now, J. Robert Oppenheimer, the father of nuclear bomb, studied physics in Göttingen. And during the time when Emmy Noether was also in Göttingen, and he studied under Max Born, who was also Jewish, and who later on went to Great Britain and won Nobel Prize for quantum mechanics. And Oppenheimer was awarded a doctoral degree in May 1927. Yeah, so for a year, 28, 29, Noether was invited by Alexandrov to spend a year as visiting professor at Moscow State University in the Soviet Union. And 1932, she received a prestigious award together with Emil Artin, actually her student. Yeah, there is a lot of story behind it, right? It was not a given that she, as a woman, could get this award. And then Noether was the first woman invited to give a plenary lecture at International Congress of Mathematics held in Zurich. She was also an editor of Mathematician Annalen, right? So all this background information is just to tell you what kind of a mathematician that we are dealing with, what we are talking about, and what Nazi Germany has kicked out, basically, right? So, and in this article, let me step back. So Göttingen, it's a university, but it was not spared of this storm of National Socialism. And Werner Weber was one of Noether's students, and he became an ardent Nazi. He even staged a boycott, and that got got his own Doktorvater to retire early, basically boycotted his class, and he was forced to retire early. Now, 1932, Noether was evicted from her apartment, denounced as a Marxist Jewess by her neighbor. And as we know, 1933, Hitler became the Chancellor of Germany. And 2 months later, the law for the restoration of the professional civil service was passed. And that banned non-Aryan professors from, and also other civil servants to work in the public sector. And so here we can see from this newspaper article, 6 Göttingen professors were forced into sabbatical. And among them was Richard Curran, you can see, and Curran was the director of the Mathematical Institute for 13 years. And also Max Born here, you can see a Nobel Prize winner later. And here you see Fräulein Emmy Noether. Yeah, so a lot of efforts were done to try to keep her. Hermann Weil, who succeeded Richard Curran as director of the Göttingen Mathematical Institute, wrote later in his memorial address, "I suppose there could hardly have been in any other case such a pile of enthusiastic testimonials filed with the ministry as was sent in on her behalf. At that time, we really thought there was still hope left that the worst could be warded off. It was in vain." So Hermann Weil was German, but his wife was Jewish, so were his children. So that's why he left Nazi Germany also for America when he was invited by Veblen to give a lecture in the US. So he just did not return. And Helmut Hasse then succeeded Weil as the director of the Mathematical Institute. He worked on number theory with Emmy Noether, and Hasse really campaigned for Noether. Although he later became a Nazi party member, but he really campaigned for Noether. And in his letter to Valentina, who was the chancellor of the university, he emphasized that Noether's abstract math is not alien, right? In German, fremdartig. So, and I quote, "The vast majority of German mathematicians who have found their way to her school over the past 20 years are of Aryan descent," right? And it would be an immeasurable loss to Göttingen and to Germany's mathematics if she found no further opportunity in Germany to continue teaching mathematics, right? So he made his point very clear. Young mathematicians in Germany need Noether. And Göttingen need Noether, and so is Germany. Yeah, but Valentina said that ever since the November Revolution, Noether has shown sympathy to socialism, and yeah, we cannot trust her with our national cause, something like that, right? So Valentina did not accept or did not allow that her position to be kept. Finally, this is the official letter from the Prussian Ministry of Science, Art, and Education of the People in September. The official termination was the end of the month. As you can see here, right, Dr. Noether, that's the official termination. Yeah. So what do we do, right? So luckily, the Institute of International Education, which was founded after the First World War, jumped to action. And they established the Emergency Committee in aid of displaced German scholars in June 1933. And I read in their mission of statement, "It is everywhere incumbent upon university faculties," I skip a few lines, "to maintain their historic duty of welcoming scholars, irrespective of race, religion, and political opinion, into academic society, of protecting them in the interest of learning and human understanding, and of conserving for the world the ability and scholarship that might otherwise disappear. Yeah, so the approach of this emergency committee was to match a purged scholar with an American university. You know, the time was the Great Depression, right? So the emergency committee did not expect universities to come up with funds because the budget was tight everywhere. So the committee just want the colleges to provide a position for, the scholar. And on the committee, we see the name President Marion Park, Bryn Mawr College. And I found her name in another document, Marion Park. And Herta Kaus was on the executive committee, and she was also a purged scholar from Nazi Germany who came to Bryn Mawr College. Marion Park steered the college really through the Great Depression and also the beginning of the Second World War. She was the third president of the college and earned her degrees from Bryn Mawr College as well. The director of the emergency committee, Edward Murrow, wrote a letter to President Park. And it says that the committee has granted the sum of $2,000 to Bryn Mawr for the support of a German scholar to be chosen by you. The grant is made on the assumption that you will desire to offer $4,000 a year, right? So you have to apply to funding and get another $2,000 somewhere. But the name of the scholar is not known yet. Noether had a lot of helpers. Weil immediately got in touch with Princeton University to arrange a visiting lectureship for Noether. And Solomon Lefschetz from Princeton University was in Göttingen in the summer of 1931. Oswald Veblen from the Institute for Advanced Study, IAS, was also in Göttingen in 1932. So Noether again, right, had a lot of people who really adored her and tried to help her. But it did not work out with Princeton University. Noether later said Princeton was a men's university which admits nothing female. Männeruniversität, die nichts Weibliches zulässt. Yeah, so we still remember freshly what kind of sexism that Emmy Noether faced while in Germany, and now she again faced sexism in America. A nearby college rose to occasion, and that was Bryn Mawr College, which was the only women's college with a doctoral program in mathematics at the time. And it was listed on the title page of Transactions of the American Mathematical Society, as we see here, along other elite universities in America. And you see also Harvard College and Bryn Mawr College. Yeah, so a side note was Felix Klein's youngest daughter, Elizabeth, also spent a year study abroad at Bryn Mawr, and she studied mathematics and physics. Yeah, so a lot of connections, more connections. Abraham Flexner, who founded IAS, his sister, Mary Flexner, attended Bryn Mawr with his financial support. And today we still have the Mary Flexner lecture series. And his brother, Simon Flexner, was the first director of Rockefeller Institute in New York. And Simon Flexner was married to M. Carey Thomas' sister, Helen Thomas. So Lefschetz approached Anna Pell Wheeler, the chair of the mathematics department at Bryn Mawr. Wheeler studied at Göttingen under Hilbert and Hermann Minkowski for a year, but the relationship with Hilbert did not work out very well, so she returned and finished her study at the University of Chicago because her then husband was a professor at the Technology Institute in Chicago. Yeah, so you see here a letter from the Rockefeller Foundation now, and it says, right? The foundation will contribute 2,000 toward the salary of Dr. Noether during the academic year 33-34. And the grant, of course, applies only to Dr. Noether and will lapse if she cannot accept. Yeah, so these are the terms that Noether would not know. So finally, the president was able to offer the position to Noether. And here we can see the offer letter, and the work at the time, the semester started on October 1st. I found a very interesting anecdote in the archives. In the offer letter, initially it says the mathematical library is fairly good. It was edited to the mathematical library contains the most important mathematical journals, right? So you can see why the president tried to make Bryn Mawr College more appealing to a mathematician of Noether's stature. How much was $4,000 worth at the time? So I was checking. So inflation adjusted in 2019 when I wrote the article. 4,000 was worth 76 grand. And then 2021, it was worth 83 grand. And then last year, it was worth 97 grand. And I just checked it again now. It is worth 100, so it's $1 million now, right? So inflation is very real. And we all need a raise. Yeah. Bryn Mawr was not the only option. Actually, Noether considered other options. Alexandrov tried to get Noether to Moscow. And I read after her exile from Germany, she seriously considered finally settling in Moscow. And I had a correspondence with her on this question. She clearly understood that nowhere else was there such possibilities of creating a brilliant new mathematical school to replace the one that was taken from her in Göttingen. And I had already been negotiating with NACOMPRO, which I looked means the People's Commissariat for Education, about appointing her to a chair in algebra at Moscow University. But as it happens, NACOMPRO delayed in making the decision and did not give me a final answer. But in retrospect, it was good that Emmy Noether did not go to Moscow because her brother, Fritz Noether, emigrated to Tomsk in Siberia. And he was later murdered by secret agents who suspected him as a Nazi spy. Right? So after the Hitler-Stalin pact was broken, then he was murdered as a Nazi spy. And before that, he was removed from the faculty at Breslau, University of Breslau. But his two sons, Hermann and Gottfried Noether, later came to the U.S. and had a successful career as a chemist and a statistician. Their daughters came to Bryn Mawr College last year to celebrate the 90th anniversary of her passing. And here is Noether's reply to President Park. She wrote in old Gothic script, and I think here is a translation maybe by a German faculty member at Bryn Mawr College at the time. So basically, she said, "Thank you very much for your offer. However, I had already accepted an invitation for this winter from Somerville College in Oxford, and can I postpone it for a year? I'm going to go to Oxford for a year first." And she communicated that also to her friends, Helmut Hasse, for example. She said she believed that postponing this invitation from Bryn Mawr by 1 year should not be a problem. She added Bryn Mawr is, by the way, again, a Frauen college, which is a women's college just like Somerville College. But as Veblen wrote me, the best of all women's colleges, and in addition, so close to Princeton that I should go over often. And something similar was communicated to her colleague Richard Brauer. If through my postponement, some funds became available, it could be perhaps somewhere else, right? So it's understandable Bryn Mawr College was an undergraduate college, and she is really, she does really high math. She tutored, she tutored Einstein, but she also advised and taught graduate students and postdocs, right? So her hesitation was understandable. She is a big fish, and the Bryn Mawr pool was a little bit shallow for her. Helen Derbyshire, the principal of Somerville College, was, however, actually unable to guarantee adequate compensation for Noether. She only got together £24, but additional money was uncertain where they could come from. Now, £24, I looked, inflation adjusted is 2,000 something pound today. So there was really no better options for Noether than Bryn Mawr. And so the day before Bryn Mawr's fourth semester began, she informed President Park that she is coming. Here are the convocation remarks by President Park from the archives, and I zoom in, and you can see, right, Dr. Noether will join the faculty will join the faculty at Bryn Mawr, and here 1 year was crossed out, and 2 years now. Noether finally arrived on November 7th in New York. She had some visa complication. And later that month, President Park already invited distinguished mathematicians from the region to hear Noether give a lecture. Initially, people did not know how good Noether's English would be, but you remember that right, Noether could even teach English to girls at Erlangen or in Erlangen, and the president found out that her English was very usable, so she immediately organized a lecture. She wanted to boast what a big fish she has caught. And Noether's letter to Hasse also showed how much she had come to enjoy Bryn Mawr and its openly friendly and cordial people. She told Hasse that she was holding a seminar with 3 girls and 1 lecturer in which they studied the first volume of van der Waerden's algebra. And starting February the next year, she was traveling to Princeton to give a weekly lecture. And for Noether, these gatherings at IAS are like a Göttingen rendezvous. So IAS is an independent research just in Princeton. Yeah, the college also established a fellowship and scholarships in her name, right? Really highly valued Emmy Noether. A younger mathematician, Olga Tolsky, as I mentioned, would later come from Göttingen to Bryn Mawr as a Noether scholar. And they would go to Princeton together to, for Noether to give lectures. The summer 1934, though, Emmy Noether returned to Germany, and she was able to have a vacation with her family. She also gave lectures in Göttingen, in Hamburg and somewhere else. But her conversation with her nephew, Gottfried, really upset her very much. Gottfried said, I'm not allowed to speak in class, and other kids taunt me for my Jewish nose. And the teacher did not even defend me, but defended other kids, right? So Germany is no longer the Germany that Emmy Noether knew, and she decided to really move her furniture finally to Bryn Mawr and quit her lease. So where did she live in Bryn Mawr? A lot of people were curious. I got inquiries from a professor of physics in Japan, for example, Professor Ota, asking where was her apartment, because you read here she lived in a house south of the Lancaster Pike. So I reached out to Bill Dunham, and he helped me. He read in a footnote that in a postcard to Dirk Tuyek, she gave her address as the Clifton, 14th Elliott Avenue, Bryn Mawr. So here is the house. So she lived in one of these apartments, I don't know which. And our amazing librarian, Alison Mills from the archives, also found this address list of Bryn Mawr faculty, and you can see here, the address is confirmed, and her office it says library, so it's actually old library. It's where my office building is. Noether's initial 2 years appointment was to expire very soon, and people were eager to keep her for longer, but where should the money come from, right? So Wheeler called Veblen to say that we are very anxious to keep her, but have no money. So long story short, a lot of people at Bryn Mawr, Philadelphia area, IAS, they really try to put together funds to keep Noether. And Veblen wrote to Flexner, basically, this is Noether, right? In view of Miss Noether's unique position in the world, the only woman mathematician of the first order, it ought to be possible to find some persons or group of people who would make it possible for Bryn Mawr to keep her permanently. However, Noether's appointment, although it was renewed for 2 years, but she died too soon. She was not able to finish her original 2-year term. She died of a surgery, or she died after a surgery to remove an ovarian cyst. Herman Weil came to Bryn Mawr to give the memorial address in Goodhart Hall. And he said Noether was a great woman mathematician, indeed the greatest that history has known. And Einstein also wrote to the New York Times, Fräulein Noether was the most significant creative mathematical genius thus far produced since the higher education of women began. Sorry. Here you see the tombstone that I mentioned, just with the EN, right? Her initials, very simplistic, very simple. And the director, Flexner, wrote to President Park, her death has shed a deep gloom over us all, but it ought to make you and Mrs. Wheeler happy to know that a few weeks ago that she remarked to Professor Veblen that the last year and a half had been the very happiest in her whole life, for she was appreciated in Bryn Mawr and Princeton as she had never been appreciated in her own country. Yeah, so that was my article. After it was published, more publications came out, including 2 books by David Rowe. Professor Rowe was an American historian of mathematics at University of Mainz in Germany. And one book was co-authored with Methilde Kohlräuber, Proving It Her Way, and the other Mathematician Extraordinaire. And then I communicated a lot with Professor Rowe. He was organizing a U.S. tour of an Emmy Noether play, and the original idea was for the play to premiere at Bryn Mawr College, which would be logical. However, the pandemic interrupted our plan, and it was postponed again and again. Finally, in 2022, the play. The U.S. tour took place, and you can see here Bryn Mawr College was second to the last. The last one was at Hunter College, and I also helped facilitate. And you see the image here. The protagonist who played Emmy Noether was swimming. Emmy Noether was a swimmer, and she loved swimming. When she was allowed to enroll at the university, she insisted on swimming in men's pool, right? So basically, she was not allowed. It was only for men. So she insisted in swimming men's pool, and the university changed the rule because of her, or thanks to her. The second children's book was published in 2020, and it says in the United States, many people, including Albert Einstein, worked to help Emmy. They found her a job at a women's college where she was welcomed with open arms, which was very true. And here we see girls biking. Emmy Noether also biked a lot in Erlangen, and cycling also taught her a lot about symmetry. This building is the old library, and I took a photo yesterday. So this is the old library where Emmy Noether's office was, and also my office is in there today. Last year, we celebrated the 90th anniversary of Noether's death, and a new plaque was put up above the tombstone. And this plaque was donated by Professor Dobetries from Duke University. She also gave the keynote speech. This is in the cloisters, yeah. More effort was done to honor Emmy Noether. For example, here in this letter by Jeff Nunes, he proposed, the letter was addressed to American Journal of Physics, right? Nunes proposed to name the units of momentum Noether, because there were so many units in physics, and a lot of them were named in honor of people, but all the people are men, right? So finally, he thinks that we should, name one of the momentums after Noether. Yeah, so I will just conclude my, this is the email, okay, sorry, my image is blocking. Yeah, okay, so so I just want to conclude by saying that despite sexism and anti-Semitism, Noether persevered, right? She really followed her passion, and she revolutionized physics and mathematics. But she was not always credited. So there are no what ifs, right? But I still would like to speculate. What if she had lived her full life, right? She very likely would have become the first female professor at Princeton, and she might have received a Nobel Prize. She for sure would have left Bryn Mawr College, but the college has helped preserve a true mathematician extraordinaire for the world. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much for your presentation. We're really excited to move into the Q&A portion of our event. So we're going to take a 2-minute break to set up, and we'll be right back for those of you joining us online.
So we did see a who's who of mathematics of the period. Everybody there was a every name I saw was a mathematician or someone academic and someone related. What can you tell us about her life outside mathematics? At Bryn Mawr or before, was there friends? Did she form non-mathematical friendships that we know about her? What can you tell us?
Yeah, thank you very much. So Noether, we don't know of any romantic relationships she has had. So she was really married to mathematics in a way. There was never any mentioning of this kind of a personal relationship, right? So I'm not aware of that part. That's why you can see foreign line, which means Miss, right? So she has been addressed as Miss Noether until the end of her life. Yeah, so that's that. And so with mathematicians, physicists also, so they are mostly academics, but with students. Indeed, so there's really not too much outside of the university circle. Her contacts were constantly students, like postdoc students, both from Germany and also from so many other countries. And what I know was, let's see, among her students, yeah, so that's maybe not in particular to your question. Her family and the family members of her direct relatives, they are non-academics. So she's a very easygoing person, and she's not just fancily anyway, right? She's just so plain. She could be occasionally socially awkward because she's just so direct, as you know of Germans, and she's especially direct. She would interrupt people at the social events if she think of something to say. So that's why when her brother wrote, the letter after she died, she wrote a letter also to President Park to thank her and mentioned his sister's idiosyncratic traits. Yeah. So I hope that answers your question to some extent. Yeah. So basically, her life was just very simple, just like a pure academic in a way. Yeah.
Thank you.
Are there any questions here in the audience?
She was also known
Wait, we want to give you a microphone. Hold on one second.
Okay. I believe she was also known as a cigar smoker.
Cigar smoker.
Which goes, of course, with the der.
The there.
Yeah.
We know Oppenheimer always smokes a cigar, but I actually don't remember a single photo of Noether having a cigar. So I'm not.
I seem to remember reading that.
Yeah.
A couple of sources.
Yeah. Yeah, so I don't remember a single photo where she actually has a cigar on it. We know Hannah Arendt likes to smoke, and but thanks for that note. Yes.
I have one question, actually, that the two people have written in about the same thing. Emmy comes from an assimilated Jewish family in Imperial Germany. And is there any evidence that she practiced Judaism, or did she relate to her Jewish identity primarily through cultural and ethnic terms? And a related question is, how assimilated or observant was she? And
Yeah. As far as I know, as you said, the family, her father, Max Noether, and the entire family were very assimilated, and they were not practicing Jews. And I think she couldn't also understand why, she was persecuted. She couldn't keep her job because she understood herself really as German. Let's see. So she also did not mind having Nazi students, among her students. So after she could not teach officially at the university, she kept teaching in her own apartment. And one of the students, as I mentioned, was Werner Weber. He came in brown shirt, and Emmy Noether did not mind, right? So I think the Judaism part, so she was not a practicing Jew and did not really emphasize that religion in her life at all. That's a short answer to your question.
No, it actually makes sense because it really also speaks to the diversity and complexity of Jewish identity and the Jewish community, that not everybody is going to be religious, but during the time of the Nazis absolutely still could be persecuted for it.
Yeah.
We've got another question here.
I wanted to follow up on your comment about what she was like as a person. And Professor quoted up Helen Thurston, so I
Helen.
collaborated with you a little bit on the play at Hunter, and with Evelyn Rich here also, a great leader at Bryn Mawr. So my understanding is that she was much beloved as a person. People really enjoyed being with her, even though she was erudite and austere in her thinking. And the proof of that is she is buried in the cloisters, and at Bryn Mawr, maybe fewer than 5 or 6 people are buried there. So it's a huge honor and very, very unusual to be buried. And it was a show of great outpouring and fondness for her as a person.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mentioned Helmut Hasse also, right? Try to defend her by emphasizing that her mathematics is not foreign, like her students are German, like, right? So yeah, not particularly Jewish, but a lot of the faculty members there are Jewish, especially in science and mathematics, and that's why they also defended Noether more so than the faculty members in philology and social sciences. Yeah.
Hi, thank you for this. I'm just wondering if you can comment on at what point did she become, or did her work become kind of well-known more generally than among her peers? So I was a graduate student in math in the 80s, and her work was very familiar to me, but my supervisor was German, in that the whole descended from all the people you mentioned. So by the 80s, Noetherian rings were a huge thing that people were studying. So obviously she was well respected by her peers in the 30s, but do you have any sense of when, her name became widely known as this kind of genius in mathematics and physics?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think her name was really known among peers and within the academic circle more than to the general public. Einstein was known to the general public, let's say that, right? But I think Noether really was not known to the general public. I don't even know today, for example, do the general public know Noether? Still not the case, right? Indeed, right? We are also, within this academic circle, so we are not quite. Hopefully, lectures like this, will help really make her more known to the outside world.
For example, Brian Greene, who's obviously a major science communicator, mentions her frequently. So I think she must have percolated into, the more widely known stream, whatever you'd say.
I think every few years, the New York Times runs a piece like Emmy Noether, the most famous mathematician you've never heard of.
Right.
Right. And right. So every few years you see something like that. But general public, I'm not sure.
Yeah. I think they also may have a series of lecture series in her name, like the Noether lecture. So hopefully more work could really be done to honor Noether. And I know at Bryn Mawr College, they try to get Bryn Mawr College set up as a historical site for physics. And the other site would be in Erlangen, and then the other site will be Bryn Mawr. So these kinds of efforts, are done.
We've got several questions that have come in online. And so we've talked a little bit about her identity as a Jewish person, but could we talk about her identity as a Jewish female? And was the sort of sexism that you've referred to in your presentation connected also to her ostracization? And the flip side of that would be, did she support other female academics or other Jewish female academics?
Mm-hmm. Oh, great question. Yeah, so I will pick up that first. She supported other Jewish academics. One of them is Olga Taussky, as I mentioned. Olga came to Göttingen to study with her, and she, so she, she helped her get this fellowship to come to Bryn Mawr. And her students, right, at Bryn Mawr were all female. Although the graduate school should be by co-ed, but anyway, at the time, 5 graduate students were all female, and she was very proud of them. Said they were very diligent and hardworking. So sexism. So, as you know, one fun thing I want to share is she was just so brilliant. As a child, her father would have friends come over to their house, and her father will give quizzes, mathematical quizzes. That's what you do as a professor of mathematics. And Emmy Noether would immediately say the answer before other boys even know what the question means, right? So that shows how brilliant she was, and that's that kind of brilliant girl who faced a lot of sexism. So many of her male peers have become professors, and she couldn't. As I shared, I think in great length, how difficult it was her to become even a Privatdozent, which means a lecturer at the university, right? So many people tried, but it is institutional, I think, sexism. Does that answer your question?
Absolutely.
Okay, thank
Do you have any others?
Sure, I've got a question, another question. So, Emmy Noether, she's coming from Göttingen, and it's it's the Princeton of Germany or something, and she ends up in Bryn Mawr, small women's college, right, a little outside off the beaten path, from those places like Harvard and Princeton, the Institute for Advanced Studies. How did she take that? Did she think, I'm coming from Göttingen and ending up here, or was she just grateful to be somewhere? Did she make a community here and say, well, I'm going to now build a new Göttingen here? Or was she resentful? Was it hard? Was it an adjustment?
Yeah, no, she was definitely not resentful. As I said, she hesitated a little bit, right? Bryn Mawr College is an undergraduate college, so she wasn't sure whether that's the right place for her. And even at Oxford, she said, some of you is a women's college, but she could actually lecture at Cambridge, right? So she was always aimed at a larger audience, people who know more advanced math. And Göttingen at the time was really the maybe number one, definitely the hub of mathematical research. So many big names, as I mentioned, they all went to Göttingen to study. That shows, what kind of a status that Göttingen had. It took really hundreds of years to build Göttingen into this center of mathematical research, and the Nazis really destroyed it maybe over a few days or weeks. And this brain drain for Nazi Germany really has become brain gain for Princeton. Princeton later on became one of the major research centers thanks to the influx of these refugees. And and also thanks to Princeton, right? That's why Emmy Noether was more willing to and more happier to come to Bryn Mawr. She always said, "There is Princeton. I can always go there to lecture," right? So Bryn Mawr is not just Bryn Mawr, right? There is because Princeton nearby, and she became happy. I think more comfortable later on at Bryn Mawr. She was very grateful that she was so well respected at the college. She did not have to lecture immediately. She was only asked to advise advanced students, and later on she held a seminar to graduate students, and that was when there is a lot of story there. But the president, for example, said we cannot keep her. Like her teaching was way too difficult, way too above our students. Which was, honest, but it's just she passed away too fast. We don't know what would happen next. She had only one doctoral student, Ruth Stauffer, and she was going to stay in the till summer 1935 so that she could officially bestow the degree on Ruth Stauffer. However, because she passed away in April, so Richard Brauer actually stepped in and advised her thesis till the end.
Thanks.
So we've got 3 more questions. The first is, there's 2 people that have asked specifically about, was her death unavoidable? and because it was sudden and tragic, and was this sort of common for the time for a surgery of this nature? So that's the first question. The second is, with respect to her political convictions, were her apparent commitments to feminism, socialism, and pacifism openly stated, or were they inferred from her biography and behavior?
Okay.
And then the third one, which is sort of to close today's session, is what can we learn from her life, her experiences as it relates to today? If we're thinking constantly about how the past informs the present, why should we care?
Okay, so first question is about her death. So I recently, I kept reading more literature on Noether, and I recently learned that actually already summer 1934, her tumor was discovered. So she actually already underwent an operation in Germany while she was there, and she planned to have her second surgery also in Germany, but her doctor in Bryn Mawr advised her not to wait. So she decided to go into Bryn Mawr Hospital to have her second surgery. So her it's a ovarian cyst, and so the operation went successfully, and she seemed to be recovering just fine in the first 3 days. It's only on the fourth day that she suddenly went unconscious, and her temperature rose to 108 Fahrenheit degree. And in the archives were letters from the physicians, and the head physician wrote to President Park that her death is inevitable. Like, if you don't remove the tumor, she would definitely die of that. But then blood vessel in her brain ruptured, and so that was the cause of her death. Yeah. So yes. So her death was inevitable, and it was not any medical accident or something. I did read in a book that had she gone to a bigger hospital, but I don't know, right? Let's not go there. And the second question was about feminism, and so I did remember your question. So Noether was all about mathematics, and she was not political at all. And there is hardly anything about her politics. She does not talk about her politics. She was a member of the Social Democrats, but she said that I have never gone more left than that. So that means she was not a communist, or she would never join the Communist Party. She was when she was in the Soviet Union, she did say that she had such a pleasant experience. She would not hesitate to return to Moscow, and but that does not mean that she really supported the political regime in the Soviet Union or anything, right? She just had a wonderful time collaborating with Alexandrov there. So I hope that answers your question in terms of her politics, right? Yeah, and as I said, right, she did not even mind, a Nazi student was among her group. And then the third question was, what can we learn from Noether's experience? I think there is a lot to learn, and she's such an inspiring figure for young girls. That's why I think children's books are so important, and she's such an inspiring figure for young science, like STEM, women in STEM, let's say, right? Very inspiring for women in STEM, and for me also, she really focused on the essential things. Like, her life was so difficult. She faced so many obstacles in her life, right? So when she got the Privatdozentship, she was already, let's do some math. Anyway, so she was already in her maybe early 40s, and when she died, she died at the age of 53, right? So. And she had to overcome so many obstacles, but she was never resentful toward Nazi Germany either, and she was not discouraged. She always focused on math. So I think the lesson for me is always focus on essential things, right? And trust. Like her, brush away the things that are not essential to you, and focus on things that are important to you.
Thank you so much. This was informative. I learned so much about the whole history of the period and Emmy Noether herself, and she's always been someone who, or for quite a while, she's been someone who has just been fascinating for what she's done. But now knowing her life and her story, it puts a lot of flesh on sort of the excitement. So thank you so much, and thanks for coming. Thanks for agreeing to give this talk. Thanks.
Thank you.